So we've seen this decline in patriotism. We've seen this rise in being embarrassed to be an American, not proud of our country. We are based on the principle that all men are created equal and that our freedoms, we have inalienable rights from God. We're getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence that purports those things next year. And so I think when you see this many people who love Jesus, they're committed to the family, and they're committed to freedom, we'll begin to see changes in our society.
Welcome, everyone, to the Zan Tyler podcast, Thriving in Your Homeschool. Today, we're going to talk about some trending news and culture again. We'll react to some reels, clips, try to keep you homeschooling families encouraged. Of course, I'm not alone. Who else is here? Say
Hey,
hi,
everybody.
Zan. Not just me, of course. Remember, before we carry on, you got to subscribe. A lot of people see your clips and your reels, Zan, but it's really important that you hit like buttons when you see these things. Leave comments. Even if your comment is just like, hey, this was funny, or that's encouraging, or hey, a homeschool family here, raise your hand. All those comments, all those likes, all those shares, they help the algorithm see that people are engaging with this content and help shares it with other people who need to hear it. So thank you so much, and try to keep it up.
1970s, there was about 13,000 homeschoolers. In the 80s, there was 200,000 homeschoolers. The 90s, 850,000. 2000s, 1.5 million. 2010s, 1.7 million. And so far, 4 or 5 years into the 2020s, there's over 5 million homeschoolers, and that number is rising as far as people wanting to have more of a say and an authority and an influence over what their children are learning.
Zan, people are waking up.
Absolutely. I'm telling you, this growth in homeschooling is phenomenal. In the early 80s, when we were homeschooling, mid 80s, I would have never believed it in a million years. I mean, when we started, we didn't know anybody in the world who homeschooled. I'm not sure where those 200,000 people were in the 80s. But evidently they were here.
That's so funny.
Somebody said something to me about, there were other people homeschooling in South Carolina when you started. I said, yes, I know, but they were all underground. I was the only one, evidently, who didn't know I could be underground in homeschool.
One thing I saw so encouraging, do you notice one common theme with those numbers? They only went one direction.
That's right.
Up.
They are only going up. That's exactly right.
Gosh, I love it. People are just, I think they're just waking up. They're realizing homeschool does not mean you shut your kids inside your house and you do 8 hours of schooling a day the same way that you've been seeing in the classroom. All it means is you take control of your child's education and you begin to tailor fit the education best for them.
Absolutely. And our kids are doing great. We'll talk about that in a little bit, how well they're doing in college and trades, jobs, everything else.
The idea that children, when they're being brought up, they have to be taught how to behave before they believe. In order for that to happen, you've got to have a structure, but that structure of the family actually has to have a direction.
When we sort of arrive on this earth and we're told, make your own way without any of those structures, you're no better off than, and there's an actual phrase that's used in Hebrew called tinok shenishba, a baby born in a forest. The idea is that a baby born in a forest has no actual moral obligations because there's no structures around them. And we've created an entire society of babies in the forest.
And they're insecure, and they have more problems with mental health than any other generation has ever had before. I'm sure you remember the famous experiment. You take children out for recess, and there's no fence, and the children all stay huddled closely together by the building. The minute you put a fence, the children wander all around the yard and play. Those boundaries make children safe, and it makes children feel safe. If they don't have boundaries, they're not safe.
Whew, that is good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say the last part again real quick. If children have boundaries, they feel safe. If there are no boundaries, they do not feel safe.
Amazing. Well, I just want to take a minute just to talk about Vody, if we can do that. He's been such an important voice for the family in the last 2 decades. He is really an amazing pastor and preacher. I've spoken at homeschool conferences side by side with him. He was in one room, I was in the other room. And so it was very special. And I just, what he did in his family, he was in Africa for many years, the president of a seminary there, came back here, had some heart trouble, and went to be with the Lord a couple of days ago. And boy, that was a surprise. And are we ever going to miss Vodi's impact, his voice? I know his family is grieving, although we know we don't grieve like others, but we have lost some important people in our lives in the last couple of weeks.
This clip actually makes me, and I think we should still talk about what he said too, but this clip, not that we're happy people die, but how great is it that people like this have felt like they've had a message, really from God, Vodi would say from the Bible. I mean, he's a pastor, that they can record it and it is so easily accessible. I think that is such, we had mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. a while ago, and you can still access his speeches and stuff like that, but it is not near what we're in now, like with Charlie Kirk, with Vadi, like their content is everywhere, can be watched again and again and again and interpolated and researched. And I think that's kind of a cool thing. Like that's a really cool, great thing. Like when we're talking to our children about these people who have passed, and it opens conversations about heaven and Jesus and the plan, and then we can show them like, hey, here's who they were, and here's what they said, and here's why it was important to the family of faith. I love what he said about boundaries. So let's same page. We can do this quick, Zan. Do we agree that the primary person who should put boundaries for the children are the parents?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if the child is shipped away the majority of the time, how are any of those boundaries enforced? How do they know the boundaries are even happening? Boundaries in the way they speak to other people, they speak to adults, boundaries about keeping secrets. I heard recently someone said, man, I just love that my kids get to go to school and maybe they can have their own little private ecosystem. It's like, what? Like, they, your 9-year-old? And so I just love that people have spoken out loud that, hey, boundaries, especially when it comes to children, are important. They're biblical, and you should be encouraged to pray about the right boundaries to set for your children.
One of the things you were talking about with all of the information being so accessible from Charlie Kirk and from Vodi, it reminds me of the verse in Hebrews that talks about Abel, even though he was dead, by faith he still speaks.
Oh,
And that's how I feel with these people of faith who have gone to heaven before us, that by faith they still speak and and really have maybe a more remarkable voice in death than they did in life.
I think, yeah, right before I move on, you just said something really powerful. Maybe they're even having a bigger impact in death than in life, because when they passed, it's in the news, they talk about it. Obviously, Vodi, it looks like it was a tragic medical situation. And Charlie was, taken, he was assassinated. But suddenly people are like, well, who were these people? Like, it's in the news, why are all these Christians upset about this? And then you can look it up and you can watch their sermons, you can watch their talks. And I think I think you're right. Um, and speaking of, I think a big word that's been happening here, and I want you to talk about it, is since Charlie Kirk's death, we now, with his memorial service, they're saying it was over 100 million people. And they hit the 100 million mark, I want to say within 2 to 3 days of the live stream. So that means
Of
100
of
million
of
of
people
his
who had seen the memorial service,
who had
okay.
watched the memorial service. So that's 100 million people who were basically preached to,
That's
who heard the
exactly
gospel.
right.
So there's a lot of talk about what this means. What is revival? Is it a revival? Can you kind of speak into that a little bit?
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in the '60s and the '70s, really, and those were tough times. We've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but we had 3 assassinations, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr. We had the sex revolution and the drug revolution. We had 2 bad Supreme Court decisions with not allowing prayer or Bible reading in school in '62 and '63. And then, in the '70s, we have Watergate in Vietnam. And so people were wondering what is going to happen to our world as we know it. Everything was just unraveling at the seams. And in comes the Jesus movement. And hundreds and thousands of kids are saved. They come to know the Lord. I was actually Joe and I both were saved through the Jesus movement. I was actually at the Cotton Bowl in 1972, which was Expo 72. There were 80,000 kids there, 80,000 students who were there worshiping and praising God. And it marked a moment of revival. I think that's when a lot of people realized this is affecting people. It will affect the culture and it's here to stay. And we saw so much fruit from that over the years. I mean, I think it laid the groundwork for homeschooling, which I believe is a revival in its own right. And then, you know, and here we are, and we get to Charlie Kirk's death. We're at another point. We have this political assassination with Charlie. Our world seems to be careening a little bit out of control in terms of the morality. We had the bad Supreme Court decision on Obergefell. And so there you go. People wonder, where are we going next? And you see that same visual with 80 or 90,000 people in the Arizona Coliseum, where
Oh,
his
right, yeah.
where
In person, yeah.
yeah, in person, you see the 80 or 90,000 people that were there, but then you see 100 million people who have watched this. And you listen to Charlie's message, which is love Jesus, get married, have a lot of kids, and cherish your freedom. And some people are saying the thing that was married from the Jesus movement is that it didn't include the part so much about cherishing our freedom. And so you wonder, is this the answer to all of our kids who have grown up in a public school system where mainly patriotism and freedom have not been taught? I mean, Joe and I were at Colonial Williamsburg in the early 2000s, and we were speaking at a leadership convention, a leadership conference for the Virginia Homeschool organization. So Joe went to get tickets, usually in Colonial Williamsburg, while I was speaking. Usually that could take an hour or two. That place used to be packed. And Joe said it was just dead when he went. And he asked the docent, she said, well, ever since public schools have quit teaching the foundational principles of freedom that this country was founded on, our numbers have really plummeted. So
Wow. And
we've,
this was
s-
in Virginia?
that was in Virginia, Colonial
So they were
Williamsburg.
so they were probably, what, 70s, 80s, 90s, inundated with the field trips,
Yes,
probably,
oh,
from all the
absolutely, and
schools.
I mean, and you'd go there, and it'd be hot. You'd wait in line forever to get tickets, and, I mean, it was pretty amazing, and so when we went and there was Joe didn't have to wait for 10 minutes in line to get the tickets. He just couldn't, and it was April. He couldn't figure out what in the world was going on in March, April. And so we've seen this decline in patriotism. We've seen this rise in being embarrassed to being an American, not proud of our country. Does that mean America's done everything right? Absolutely not. But does it mean, we are based on the principle that all men are created equal and that our freedoms, we have inalienable rights from God. We're getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence that purports those things next year. And so I think when you see this many people who love Jesus, they're committed to the family and they're committed to freedom, we'll begin to see changes in our society.
And
And,
I think it was, you said the Jesus movement, which I've, not aging myself, but from people like you have told me about it. And, I grew up West Coast, so it was huge over there because
yes,
that's the
yes.
beach, Orange County, all the revivals, which, by the way, during COVID, there was a lot of churches gathering in mass amounts on those same beaches, which was beautiful. Like, that was really cool. It was almost like hearkening back to because it was the same beach, you know what I mean? It was still Calvary Chapel out there and everything. So it was pretty cool. But like, you kind of nailed something that you said. The movement was great, and it was spiritual, and it was personal, and it was this wave of God. Um, it wasn't really talked about in politics or part of politics, which I'm not even making a moral statement on that. But what was interesting is the gospel was preached at Charlie's memorial by who you'd expect, Pastor Rob McCoy, who, fun fact about him, I was supposed to meet him for sushi once and I was late, but he was still there when I met with him. But we expect him to preach. He's the pastor.
Yes,
And I was
yes.
crying, my wife, but then to hear consistently state and federal leaders also preach. Like J.D. Vance saying, hey, I haven't really spoken about faith at all in the last several weeks or months, and that's wrong. And I will be speaking about it much more because it is personal and it's true. And you need Jesus. He died for your sins. I mean, it was the most basic forward gospel message ever. So to hear people in politics, that's what's so cool about that, Zan, is it's flying in the face a little bit of like, well, hang on. Keep politics over there. We don't talk politics. Like, let that be its own little ecosystem. But over here, let's talk Jesus in our family and in church and in youth group and you know what I mean? But we're like, like, don't talk. Keep,
Yes, don't bring your
don't,
Christianity into the public
yeah,
square.
just leave that
And
over there. And
that's
so for it
exactly
just
right.
for it to intersect, like, look at it this way. We had Phil Wickham and a bunch of other amazing worship leaders lead worship for 3 hours at an event where the vice president and the president of the United States spoke. Like, that alone should show this new wave that's happening, that, you know, the revolution, the giving your life to Jesus, like that becoming the most important thing in your life affects everything,
About your
including
life.
and,
That's
and
right.
including politics. We've, since Bible school, there's kind of this strange notion that when you're learning theology, and 'cause I went to Bible school, I'm not just making this up. When you're learning theology and the tenets and New Testament survey, Old Testament survey, we talk a lot about how the Holy Spirit invades our life in every aspect, but there's certain aspects we kind of pretend he doesn't. And politics is definitely one of them. Like, you never talked about it. And so it's pretty beautiful to see that changing actively. Like, you have pastors who feel free to talk about what's happening in their cities politically and culturally, and the biblical perspective of that, how you should probably be informed, things you should be knowing about. Even in the Bible. So one of the famous I'm thinking like Sunday school stories, right? The heavy hitters, David and Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den, Paul, Saul to Paul conversion. I'm looking at these heavy hitters, the life of David, the Solomon, right? So I'm going through all these. You know what's really fascinating about the woman, the big one, Esther, right? These are
That's
like
the big
these.
one.
Well, I mean, it was like
Yes,
this. It was
yes,
almost a
because you've been called
genocide
for
of the
such a
Jews.
time as this. That's exactly right. Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's go, and I'll do this fast. You've been called for such a time as this. What was this time? A political time. She did political things with political leaders to change, to actually, and then she appeals and says Haman was this crazy nut job, and he was like, what? And then takes care of Haman, and then he already wrote a law, so he writes a new law that allows the Jews to defend themselves. All of that is politics. And I just found out recently, forgive me for being ignorant, but the story of Daniel, I was always taught as a kid, okay, the rule had been passed and it was a verdict. So he prayed in his window because he felt like the Lord was still calling him to do that. So it was public. So then he gets thrown in the lion's den, right? And then God, or the angels, go and they save him from the lion's den. What I was not well informed of as a child is Daniel was one of 3 top advisors who oversaw multiple other, I forgot the name of them. So there was it was the king, and then there was 3 main oversights, and then under them, I want to say there was 12 or 20. Someone's going to fact check me on this, but basically because Babylon had grown so much. And so he had different advisors and different kind of governors, and then they would all report to these 3. Daniel was one of those 3. They skipped that part. It's like he was one of the top 3 political leaders in Babylon, which is wild because that means Babylon sieges Israel, which by the way took a year, which is also political. And then they take all of these people, Jeremiah 29:11, for the plans I have for you, says the Lord, not to harm you, but for you to prosper, et cetera, even though they're going to be in captivity, and then takes Daniel and puts him in like the number 2 basic position in political power. And because they hated him and his Jewish beliefs is how they came up with this weird law about praying to the king.
Praying. That's right.
But it was all left out. Like, we've been leaving these things out. And like, we kind of like, we'll just kind of position it. You know what I mean? Like this, it's like, there's a reason. Yep. There's a reason they targeted Daniel.
When his 3 friends that were thrown into the lion's den, the
Shadrach,
fiery
Meshach,
furnace,
and Abednego,
is the same thing. They refused. They were 3 of the top leaders in the country as well under Daniel. And there were a lot of people that were jealous of them because they were Jewish. And they told the king, these 3 Jews you brought in and gave so much power. And when they refused to bow down to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, which was a very civics meeting. They had everybody who was anybody in the kingdom powerfully that was there, and those three refused to bow down and worship Nebuchadnezzar, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace.
You said it, Zan. We could move
So-
on. Sorry, I get worked up, and you just kind of pointed it out. Like, we're having civics leaders not even beat around the bush. You know, it used to be. You know, it used to be like and if there's in a political speech or political whatever, you kind of knew the right-leaning conservative or maybe the Bible-believing one because they might throw in like, and I have faith in God that da 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 da. And if they threw in God, you kind of knew like, wink, wink, like he's on ours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now it's like, they're like, no, like there's one faith and there's one God and there's only one way to. I'm like, oh, come on. Like, I don't know. I'm just excited. I'm fired up. You're right. Revival's here and it's coming. And I'm so excited that the homeschool movement is a massive part of that.
I think so too. I think so too, because, we have been teaching for a long time that we need to cherish our freedoms that have been provided for us in this country. Yeah. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
Do you know anything about the public school students versus homeschool students are faring currently?
Homeschool students test way better than public school students. Colleges want them way more because they're able to get more one-on-one attention. And not only that, is they actually like learning. By the time public school kids get to college, they don't want to learn. They're not as inspired. They're not as motivated to really excel in their field. They're just It takes the spirit out of learning.
She said it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've talked to so many college admissions personnel over the years since we started homeschooling. And one of the things we wanted to do was to show how well our graduates do. So in talking to these admissions people, one of the things they say is that homeschoolers come into their campuses with an intellectual vitality they don't see in many other students because they haven't been burned out in institutional setting. The other thing they say is that these kids are really independent learners. They know how to take a syllabus, use it, go to class, study, and be responsible for their own education. And the third thing I've heard from college admission personnel across the country is that these kids come in and they're leaders on campus. And that's the one thing that really throws them for a loop is because they think if anybody were to have their head in the sand, it would be these kids. But they come on campus and they exhibit leadership qualities as well. And so our kids are doing great in the college setting. And they're sought after.
And to round that out, yes, they do in fact get scholarships.
Absolutely. All of our kids went to college on a variety of scholarships.
And that was before homeschooling, as we saw in the beginning here, that was before homeschooling was ultra trendy.
Yes.
So your kids, I love it. So yes, they can go to college. But this is going to lead into our next segment right now. We got some news here about should they go to college, which is also a really, really good question. The Ford CEO, Jim Farley, he's trending a little bit right now because he's been doing kind of an inventory of his staff, his team. He's traveling, he's looking at the factories. And he warns that AI, artificial intelligence or generative AI, whatever, will wipe out half of white collar jobs. But the essential economy actually has a huge shortage of workers. So just quick overview from what he's seeing. And I think he's a pretty good litmus test, one of the largest car manufacturers on the planet. So we're talking manufacturing and the design and the IT and the graphic, you know what I mean? There's so much to that. And he's not the only one. Amazon's. So we have other CEOs like Andy Jassy, Dario Amodei. Forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly. CEOs of multi-million dollar companies. That we are losing essential economy. And currently there's a worker shortage, roughly around 600,000 in factories in the United States and 500,000 in construction. He believes there's an education system misalignment. There's this massive emphasis on four-year college pass, regardless of degree, which we've talked about before is
That's
obviously a huge
right.
problem
And we haven't been teaching our kids the trades.
at
So
all. And it says
that's right.
entry level hiring in tech firms is down 50%. Here's the scary part. I thought maybe it was like since the 80s. No, it's down 50% since 2019, which is just a few
Wow.
years ago.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just wanted your kind of opinion on that. You've raised kids. I'm just starting. So how about you teach me where tell me where
Well,
my kids should go, Zan.
Well, we're seeing it so much more now, an emphasis on the trades. The other thing is you go to a 2-year school and you don't come out with the massive debt that many students are coming out with in 4-year schools. So, so we're past the place where, for so long, everybody just went to college. Well, it's gotten so expensive now. You need to find out what your children are interested in. I mean, there are some jobs. Each of my kids have jobs that they couldn't, as adults, couldn't have gotten without a college degree. And but even I think that landscape is changing.
I
We're
was gonna
much
say, do you mind saying rough years-ish
no.
when your kids got those jobs?
Yeah,
Like, was it 2010s,
it
early
it would
2000s?
be well, 2005 to 2010, 2012.
So do you
Uh,
think in about now we're trying to look into the future, which is hard, but do you think in 10 to 20 years, those same jobs, all of them, will require the exact same type of degree, or do you think that they're gonna shift?
I just think we're seeing such a shift in higher education anyway. We're seeing so many online opportunities and dual enrollment, ways to make the 4-year degree more accessible without all the debt. And we're seeing this emphasis on trades, which I think is really important. Kids going to a trade school for 1 or 2 years, getting out with very little debt and going straight to work and making really good salaries. For so long we thought you can't advance in our country without a 4-year degree. That is not the case any longer. And so it's really important to sit down with your children. I think these gap years are a great idea. There are a lot of Christian organizations doing gap years. The kids may go on mission trips. They do a lot of different things. But you just want to make sure that your child has some inclination of where they're headed before you amass all that debt.
I had a game night, this is a couple of years ago, and it was new guys I hadn't met, and one of the guys was an elevator repair technician, which I thought was just fascinating. I don't know if do you ever meet someone who just does something random that
That's so
you
different. Yes.
but you, like,
Yeah.
interact with the thing all
Yes.
the time. You're like, "Oh, you're the guy." Like, you're like, "Tell me about it. That's interesting." I'm always curious. And so my game night was in Santa Barbara at the time, California. He said his jurisdiction, I wanna say, was South San Francisco to San Diego. And for those who don't live on the West Coast, if you live on the East Coast, that would be like if the entire East Coast was your jurisdiction. Like, it's half the state. And I was like, "Why?" He said, "Well, there's no there's, like, none of us. Like, no one thinks to go find out how to become an elevator repair technician. Like, and so these elevators, that's why you'll see the out of order on elevators forever. There's that show, your audience might have mixed opinions on The Big Bang Theory. It was one of the biggest sitcoms ever in history, but the big running joke was their elevator was permanently out of service. And it's a joke, but it's also kind of real. Like, when elevators go out of service, you have to pay in the yin yang to, like, get them fixed. And so I looked it up. Out of the gates, it pays $100,000 a year. Out of the gates, it's one of the highest paid trades. The median pay is about 100 grand. And basically you just do an apprenticeship program and you're paid. And here's the best part. You're paid
You're
day
paid
one.
while you're doing it. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, we've really got to, for so long people said our education was geared toward an industrial
Mhm.
economy.
Right.
like World War II, and that we never recovered from that. And now we're moving into this trades economy, I think, where it will be, it will be equally as lucrative, if not more, to go into a trade than have a 4-year degree. I mean, there'll be some things, med school, law school, those types of things where you've got to have that. And but I really do think the times, they are a changing.
The
And
the times they are a
they are
changing, but
changing.
it's funny, but some of these trades, it's almost like they've been waving their hands because AI, right? Everyone's talking AI.
That's right.
At
Hey,
at the end of the
and
at the end of the
yes,
article, they said probably wipe out about half of white collar jobs, which makes sense. So I'm hiring right now for my podcast company, and AI is actually a mandatory requirement. Like you need to have a general understanding of how to use it in your your workload. But half of these trades I'm looking at, HVAC tech, welder, elevator installers and repairmen, line worker, like they've actually been kind of missing for at least 20 to 30 years. Like we've actually had an issue with people getting in these. It's like Mike Rowe's not the only one being like, you should do these jobs. Like you get paid
yes,
right away.
that's right. That's right. And so, I mean, and the other thing is, we're losing our kids, if you want to use the word that I don't care for too much, deconstructing their faith. Many kids are walking away from the faith in the colleges they choose to go to. And we're not talking about kids who don't know what they believe or aren't strong in their faith when they go. And so I think that's another thing we need to be aware of is where are our kids going to school and what will it do to their faith?
Totally. So in closing, all we're trying to say, if you've already peeled back the onion of education and decided to homeschool anyways, just keep peeling. Because sometimes we peel enough, we're like, great, if we can get to college, I'm out. It's like, well, nope, just keep peeling that onion, keep looking. What colleges are worthwhile. If you value discipleship, don't you want that discipleship to continue into college? Remember, a male's prefrontal cortex is not solid until 25. And if your kid's accelerated, which if you're in homeschooling, most likely they will be, he still has like 5 or 6 years of that prefrontal cortex forming and solidifying. And you want that to be in an environment that is continually strengthening his faith. Anyway, all right, or her faith, strengthening his or her faith.
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, just all we're trying to do, help you guys think, helps me think. Zan, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for always teaching me new things. And till next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.